So Jordan Peterson is writing has produced a video. Africa is not poor because of colonization. Can't wait to see this. Can't wait to see this.
In one of your articles where you make reference to these rating systems, the bottom 10 countries for doing business in the world: Chad, Haiti, Central African Republic, Congo, Democratic Republic, South Sudan, Libya, Yemen, Venezuela, there's a lovely example, Eritrea and Somalia. And so there are 3 exceptions in the
Somalia? Where are you from? Somalia? Like, what the fuck?
African ecosystem.
Yeah.
Mauritius, Rwanda, Kenya, South Africa, Botswana, and Zambia. You pointed out in your prospectus, is it prospectus article?
Yeah, prospectus article of Artbridge Institute.
Right, that Mauritius is a rising star, and Rwanda is in some ways comparable to Georgia. So some of these countries have started to get this right.
Yes.
And so what's the consequence of that? And what does right mean?
What they have understood, what these countries have understood, is that economic freedom is at the center for prosperity building.
So this is actually one of the very common tactics of the right wing, is find someone, a collaborator, to voice the words that you want to say. And this is all bullshit. Economic freedom is the key to prosperity. Absolute dog water. I encourage you to look up the major contributors to her think tank. Do you want to give it to me? Do you want to give me the information? What is she from? Speaker and entrepreneur from Austin, Texas. She was on there to trash Black Lives Matter a month ago. She destroys Black Lives Matter. Incredible. The John Templeton Foundation? The Atlas Network? Jesus Christ. Okay.
Rwanda, for example, Paul Kagame, the president of Rwanda, is explicit about it. He said he wants to be the Lee Kuan Yew he wants to be the Singapore of Africa, and Lee Kuan Yew is his model. Now,
Lee Kuan Yew is a fucking dictator in Singapore who rules an it's an authoritarian capitalist state. First of all, Singapore exists at the heart of trade routes. It's not a model that a large landlocked country can follow. It's ridiculous.
Dirty mouths are going to start shouting, "Oh yeah, see, authoritarian, blah blah blah." Whatever. Me, I want to talk only about the economics.
Authoritarianism suddenly isn't a problem. Oh, authoritarianism isn't actually the problem now. As long she is part of the national bourgeoisie for her own country. This is how colonialism works. Even if after occupation is over, the imperial bourgeoisie bribes the national bourgeoisie of the formerly colonized country for their own benefit and harm of the proletariat. Of course. Of course. Yes, there's going to be some collaborators that profit. Give me a break. Casual $500,000 from ExxonMobil. What was her group? What did you say was $500,000? Why doesn't Ethiopia just build a canal across Africa like Panama did? I mean, there's already, there's already one though. As science behind global warming becomes increasingly sketchy, many environmentalists clutch even harder to their views. Jeez.
Side, if you take Lee Kuan Yew and Singapore as your example, then it means that, like him, you're going to have to be serious about economic freedom. And that's exactly what he did. That's what Singapore did. When Singapore figured that out, they went on to put in the right reforms to make their environment some of the most business-friendly environments in the world, one of the most free markets environment in the world. And you saw the magic of Singapore. Today, Singapore is richer than its ex-colonizer, Great Britain. So when I hear people telling me...
No, it's not. It has per capita income does not mean greater wealth. What is she talking about? I hate this. It's like, oh, you have a small city state. It's now richer than the... No, it's fucking not. It depends upon the international markets that British colonialism now supported by American colonialism and imperialism and hegemony. Singapore would not be rich without the United States Navy out there patrolling the sea lanes and keeping them open.
today, oh, Africa is poor because of colonization. I'm like, please, let's move on from that. Does it have maybe a tiny percentage in where we are today? Maybe, and I don't know. But I know it's not the cause, because if it were, many countless countries have been colonized before. And by the way, colonizing one another is humanity's history. It just happened that maybe Africa has been one of the last, colonized region in the world. So in our psyche, it is there, and it acts like nothing happened before to others.
So, I mean, one of the things that's funny about this is she is depending upon your utter lack of knowledge, which for a Western audience, of course, this is a good bet, of the continuing colonialist enterprise. That's these countries becoming massively indebted to the IMF, not being allowed to do the things that the United States did, the things that China did, the things that Europe did to build up their own domestic industry. That's illegal there. Do you think China became the second largest economy in the world through economic freedom? Serious question. Did the Chinese Communist Party say, we're going to do economic freedom?
But flash news, it's the history of the world. We've been capturing each other back and forth, all of that. So anyway, but the truth is, Singapore, richer than Great Britain today. And then Hong Kong happened. And then because Hong Kong happened, China even today happened. Because China's like,
what? Hong Kong happened, so China happened? Oh, this is great. I can't wait to hear this one.
Wait a minute, what went on over there? And then China went on to do the exact same thing with its SEZs, the special economic zones, some of the most free market zones in the world.
That's absolutely fucking nonsense. That's total babble. The special economic zones allowed foreign capital to come in as long as they gave control of the companies to Chinese nationals. This is some of the most restrictive places to bring capital in the world. China has extensive capital controls, meaning you can't take money out of the country. Bring money in, but you got to partner with Chinese nationals. You got to partner with the Chinese state. China is dominated by government-owned enterprise. What are you talking about? This is batshit crazy. Like, what are you talking about? The reason why China got rich is because they didn't do a free market.
Then look at it happen in communist China, who, when it comes to economics, decided that we're going to do the free market, we're going to be capitalist, because that's the only way. We tried everything else. We killed hundreds of millions of people, and we have nothing to show for it. But now that we're tired of being disrespected members of society,
then they're good. China, I thought China was bad. China's good, but China's bad. This is the contradiction of people like Jordan Peterson. He's laughing because he knows they're lying. Or at least he's totally ignorant. Pathetic.
Guess what? That's the other thing, too. You want to be respected in this world, you're going to have to be among the prosperous ones for other reasons. Would it be nice, G, that we respect people just because? Absolutely. But that's really not the world we live in. So when China got tired of being disrespected, they're like, maybe we got to build also some prosperity here, because then they're going to hear us. And today, China, being one of the, being where it is at, even Hollywood, who tries to tell the world how to think, is being told by China what movies to make and how to tweak stories and history in order to be palatable for them. You see the power that comes with being prosperous.
Yes, having money obviously gives you power in capitalist society. Like, what are you
The Consumer Price Index has reached yet another 40-year high, and the latest GDP numbers confirm that the United States is in a recession. Now is not the time to have all your money in the stock market or tied to the U.S. dollar. Protect your savings from a highly turbulent economy.
He's selling gold. Oh, Jordan Peterson, man. Incredible. Text Jordan for your free information kit.
Gold.
What would you recommend concretely to countries like Senegal to get the hell out of the way, let's say, of the people who would, like you, would do everything they could to try to make it better? I mean, one of the things that happened with India is India established the Indian Institute of Technology, which is a deadly engineering school, and a huge number of its graduates went to Silicon Valley, as you well know. Yep. And many of the successful Indian graduates of IIT started to dump money back into India and build a.
By the way, Chad, she recommended Kagame. She recommended Kagame. I want to show you something that I found as a good model. Here's what the Human Rights Watch said. It said, according to Ida Sauer, Central African Director for Human Rights Watch, Rwandans who have dared raise their voices or challenge the status quo have been arrested, forcibly disappeared, or killed. Independent media has been muzzled, and intimidation has silenced groups working on civil rights or free speech. Human Rights Watch released evidence of irregularities by election officials, including forcing voters to write their votes in full view and casting votes for electors who had not appeared. That's who she said's good. That's the model for Africa.
Capitalist infrastructure there, or help build a capitalist infrastructure there. So this sort of thing can really take hold. If you were making recommendations to governments who wanted to get on board and stop being like Chad, Haiti, Central African Republic, Congo, South Sudan, Libya, Yemen, and Venezuela, etc., what concrete steps should they take from the bottom up to get the hell out of the way?
Exactly. So two things we've been doing, because I'm a practitioner, as that's my entrepreneurial journey. I'm an entrepreneur, so I practice what I preach, but I also preach. I preach for free markets, and so when it comes to that, I'm one of the hats that I wear is as the director for the African Center for Prosperity of the Atlas Network, the largest organization in the world of free market think tanks around the world. And so what we do there is we work on reforms around the world to take down barriers of entry for local entrepreneurs. So that's one thing. But as we all know, that's a great initiative to take, and we've been making some really good advances in many countries, especially in Ghana. We've been making a lot of progress with our partners there, Imani. But that is piecemeal legislation. It takes forever. It is hard as heck. And by the time you made a gain here, you made 20 losses over there, and it's a continuous problem. But until we get better, we got to continue at it. So that's one thing we've been doing. And so that's a hat I wear, working with free market think tanks to try to make it easier for local entrepreneurs to join in the party. Additionally,
So there you go. That's exactly what it is. It's to find local bourgeoisie to join with international capital to exploit these countries. And Rwanda is a great example of a country that's doing that. And they steal a lot of their resources from the Congo. They literally illegally go across the border and use slave labor to steal resources from the Congo. They're doing internal African colonization.
I'm going bold. I'm going
Christ.
radical. For the past few years, we've been advocating an idea for Africa that found some of its roots in Latin America. And again, I'm related to the people who are involved in this. My husband being one of the key figures in this movement, a movement called the Charter Cities. Paul Romer calls it like that. He's a Nobel laureate in economics. Others call it the Free Cities. I like to call it the Startup Cities. So the best way to think about it, Jordan, and it goes back to what you were talking about earlier when you use the word operating software. Most of the most of the low-income nations, so meaning back in the days, the way we used to call it is poor nations, they have regulations for poverty. They're basically regulated for poverty, meaning the laws, the set of law, poverty. It only calls poverty. And so what some of these folks have thought about, looking at the Dubai example, Dubai just recently entered the top
Nationalized oil company controlled by an authoritarian state. You think you're going to be able to take your own resources and not have them extracted by Western countries? Incredible brain.
Top 10 of international financial centers of the world. And what Dubai did at some point is think about it and be like, on this bare,
Dubai is rich because of oil.
And plot of sand that's technically worth nothing right now, as is, this 110 acres of land, sand everywhere. They're like, well, maybe Sharia law is not the best for business. We got to think about better set of laws for business. We're talking only about business, not family law, not anything else but business. And they decided there's got to be something better. And so they looked around, and that's actually when, to take one of the terms you used.
This is just blabber. I'm sorry, I'm done. It's just blabber. It's fucking pointless. Literally nothing to grab onto. The few examples she cited, she immediately had to be like, yeah, it's authoritarian. So her examples of development are China. The Chinese Communist Party is not doing free markets in China. Yes, there's been some liberalization and private effort that's been allowed, but it's all firmly under the control of the state planning authority and heavily controlled, including direct state enterprise. Oh, we already read this. We read this already, Cannabis Corpse. The U.S. made a breakthrough battery technology that gave it to China. We read this already. We read this like when it came out. Here, because I want to show you something to discuss when people talk about China, Africa. They talk about Africa still being under the control of Western powers. This is what they mean. It's not just like, oh, they're feeling bad about colonialism.
The French Empire was one of the most powerful in human history. At its height, it controlled almost 10% of the world's land area. From Southeast Asia to West Africa, the country we today associate with baguettes and cinema was a dominant global power. And that was particularly true in Africa. France oversaw territory spanning 17 modern-day nations, from Morocco to the Congo. Under the banner of a civilizing mission, France oversaw brutal occupations that engorged the wealth of the empire and left a terrible legacy for ordinary Africans, marked by slavery, extraction, and murder. And today, France's empire in Africa is still around, in a streamlined, more profitable, and even more exploitative form. Let me explain. In the aftermath of the Second World War, there was a wave of decolonial movements sweeping across Africa and Asia. And the French, humiliated by their defeat and occupation at the hands of the Nazis, were eager to maintain their empire. So they responded to revolts in Algeria, Indochina, and Madagascar with brutal reprisals. Maintaining foreign holdings became increasingly difficult. By 1960, France was forced to grant independence to almost all its colonies. But something really important happened in Africa. Basically, the leadership of France decided to keep their empire in Western and Central Africa intact in everything but name. The plan was simple. When an African country gained its independence, it was made to sign a so-called cooperation agreement with France, which would outline the nature of their relations moving forward. In exchange for French foreign aid, African countries were required to give France rights over natural resources, allow France to maintain troops in their territory indefinitely, and, most importantly, keep these countries' currencies linked to France's currency, the franc. Instead of having their own currency, they were to use the franc of the Financial Community of Africa, what is now called the CFA franc. The French framed these cooperation agreements as a choice, but they were also clear about the consequences of defiance. When the leader of Guinea, a socialist named Sékou Touré, rejected the cooperation agreement with France and declared that he preferred to be poor in freedom than rich in slavery, the French government decided to make an example of him. They cut all foreign aid to Guinea and did everything they could to destabilize the government. They launched a secret campaign to print fake Guinean banknotes and flood the country with them. One French spy later bragged, the operation was a total success. Guinea's economy, already very weak, never fully recovered. The French said that these countries existed within the so-called French community, but the policy would come to be known more widely as France-Afrique. It was about having the former colonies in a position that was maximally advantageous to French interests. Many of the first generation of post-colonial leaders in former French colonies had essentially been installed by the French. They spoke French, had spent time in France, and were well integrated with French elites. Jacques Faucart, a French diplomat, oversaw French relations with Africa for almost 30 years and built a huge web of client relationships with African leaders, using corruption.
So this is exactly, and they used corruption, as you just saw. They went into that African country with bags full of fake cash that they printed at the French Mint. Can you imagine if the United States did that to even Great Britain? If the United States went to Great Britain and started to flood Great Britain with trillions of pounds of fake currency, what do you think would happen to the English economy if we did that? So, like, the idea that, Africa is poor, it's because of Africans' genetics, as opposed to the fact that you're literally corrupting their leaders so you could steal the natural resources.
Covert operations to make them loyal subordinates. When local political orders were threatened, French. They spoke French, had spent time in France, and were well integrated with French elites. Jacques Faucart, a French diplomat, oversaw French relations with Africa for almost 30 years and built a huge web of client relationships with African leaders, using corruption and covert
By the way, Macron is doing the same shit today
to make them loyal subordinates. When local political orders were threatened, the French weren't afraid to protect their hand-picked dictators. Since 1960, France has invaded Africa more than 50 times. Look at the Central
French
African
Foreign
country
Legion
of Gabon as
primarily.
one example. Gabon is particularly important to France because it has a huge supply of oil and an even bigger supply of uranium. Among the African colonies, Gabon was historically one of the very closest to France. In 1967, a man named Omar Bongo became Gabon's president, soon turning the country into a one-party dictatorship. And Bongo was intimate with France. He had been appointed after flying to Paris for what was basically a job interview with the president. So under Bongo, France and Gabon enjoyed a relationship that benefited both sets of elites. Gabon's oil was pumped by the French state-owned oil company ELF, and its uranium went right into France's arsenal of nuclear weapons. In return, France subsidized Gabon's budget, especially the parts that flowed into the pockets of Omar Bongo and his family. At one point, Bongo was worth over $130 million. Gabon, meanwhile, remained poor and underdeveloped. Under Bongo, it had one of the highest infant mortality rates in the world. Instead of investing in the Gabonese economy, Bongo spent state funds on influencing French politics in his favor, bankrolling the campaigns of central future French presidents. Even today, France keeps troops in the country to support Gabon's current ruler, who happens to be Omar Bongo's son. And somehow, Gabon is
decolonialization. Oh, it's not colonization keeping Gabon poor. Oh no, it's the African, they don't have enough economic freedom. Can you imagine being the scum of the earth that knows these facts and then goes in front of millions of people and lies blatantly? Doesn't that make you feel like that person that Jordan Peterson is one of the scummiest pieces of shit on the fucking planet? Don't you agree?
Is actually one of the happier stories. Other countries, like the Central African Republic, are today some of the poorest in the world, in part due to the legacies of French-backed dictators like Jean Bedel Bokassa. But there's another aspect of French influence that's even more important. Probably the most central part of all is the CFA franc, the last colonial currency still in widespread use. In practice, the countries that use the CFA franc have virtually no monetary sovereignty. The value of their currency is linked to the euro. The poorest countries in the world have a currency controlled by the richest countries. And so the
poorest countries in the world have a currency controlled by the richest countries. Let that sink in. So not only are their dictators handpicked by France, their money is under control of France. Their resources are exploited by the French. That's the reality of much of Africa. You think other parts of Africa are any better?
The imperatives of European countries, fiscal discipline and fighting inflation, end up shaping the very different world of Western and Central Africa. That leads to an overly tight approach to credit, something that's necessary in our current system for an economy to grow. It means that any appreciation in the euro makes exports from these countries less price competitive. So just look at what happened in Senegal. When the euro appreciated against the dollar from 2000 to 2009, the value of the CFA franc got higher. But this made local Senegalese rice more expensive than imported rice from Thailand. So Senegal, which was trying to build its own domestic rice industry, instead saw Thai rice wipe out local rice farmers. So because domestic products are expensive, this makes export-driven growth nearly impossible, which is necessary to lead a country out of poverty. That's why most countries that use the CFA franc have growth rates significantly lower than their neighbors.
Wait a minute, chat. So the countries that are controlled by France grow slower. Who fucking knew?
Because the CFA discourages the development of domestic industry,
Very polite
many
vampire,
of these
thank
economies
you.
have actually been shrinking. The Ivory Coast, the largest CFA franc country, has a real GDP per capita 1/3 lower than it had in 1978. Other CFA franc countries like Cameroon and the Republic of the Congo reached their highest levels of real GDP per capita in the 70s and 80s. And because economic growth is weaker, there's more incentive for local elites in these countries, always tied closely to French multinationals, to take as much money out as possible. Billions of dollars have flooded out of these countries and into shell corporations and foreign bank accounts. Through massive corruption, these African elites have joined the ranks of the global super rich. In 2007, for example, Omar Bongo's daughter-in-law appeared on VH1 to buy an LA mansion for $25 million. And elites in France get a great deal too. They enjoy cheap access to natural resources and kickbacks from shady business deals. A French billionaire named Vincent Bolloré now owns most of the major ports across West Africa. In France, Bolloré is known as the, quote, king of Africa. So French colonialism in Africa has never really ended. This is why academics use the term neo-colonialism. Even as the branding of empire has faded away, the structures of economic extraction have only grown stronger. This neo-colonialism is actually a much more efficient form of exploitation than the colonialism of the past. The French no longer pretend to care about building functional governments or improving local living standards. It's pure extraction, all the time. So these African countries are not underdeveloped, they're overexploited. France is almost totally reliant on its influence in Africa for its economic power. In the words of Italy's foreign minister, if France didn't have its African colonies, because that's what they should be called, it would be the 15th largest world economy. Instead, it's among the first, exactly because of what it's doing in Africa. And the French know this. François Mitterrand, former president of France, said it himself. Without Africa, he declared, France will have no history in the 21st century. Today, of course, France faces competition from China within Africa, and new challenges to the colonial symbolism of the CFA franc. There are plans to change the currency's name and abandon the most overt symbols of the colonial past to make it look like the system is more African than French. But France has no intention of actually abandoning a system of extraction that has made it one of the richest nations on Earth. The real question is whether the next generation of Africans will allow it to continue.
And this is why there's so much anti-Chinese rhetoric in the West, because our Western governments understand the status quo, which is one of extreme extraction. So when the Chinese come in to these areas, they can offer a much better deal easily. And any places where there's any democratic will or pressure for the influence of the benefit of the people, people take on the Chinese deals. And that's why everybody's like, China, they're evil, China, evil, China, evil, China, because they know how much evil we are currently doing and benefiting from. And if they come in with any kind of fair deal, oops-a-daisy, they're going to get picked.
I'm Ismail Lutfi for the Gravel Institute.
And it's not that I think China is some sort of like good country because they're good. It's just when there's competition for those deals and those resources, and it isn't just one-way colonial exploitation, Africa will be able to play one power against the other for their own benefit.
French President Emmanuel Macron's visit to Algeria. It looks like Macron's bid to mend broken ties with a country which was once under French colonial rule has not gone down well with the Algerians. Now, during his visit to the city of Oran, the French president decided to talk to the people after exiting the music store, Disco Maghreb. And this is what happened when Macron decided to talk to the Algerian people. He was booed by the residents who were present there, even as he tried to put up a brave smile and tried to wave at the crowds and also showed a thumbs up to them.
Monsieur le Président, s'il vous plaît. Monsieur le Président.
These videos that have since gone viral on social media, the locals can be heard saying things like, and I quote here, France is eating our country. We are against France because it has done a lot of harm to us. And the country just wants gas from Algeria. The public anger eventually forced the French president to leave from the place. Now, the incident that took place on the last day of his visit is being viewed as a major setback and also a bit of an embarrassment for the French president. In the president's efforts to try and repair the diplomatic relations with Algeria, Macron's office has dismissed this criticism and has described the visit as a bit of a success and has said that he had himself decided to cut short the walkabout to avoid people being injured as they jostled to try and shake his hand. This is the statement that's been put out by Macron's office, but what was clearly visible was that the French president was being booed out of the streets. The Macron's office further insisted that his 3-day visit in Algeria, in which he met with the Algerian president, was aimed at facilitating cooperation on issues like immigration and terrorism. France, remember, is a former colonial power in Algeria, and Algeria, of course, got its independence in 1960.
Independence.
WION is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news.
Meanwhile, this happened this week, or last week rather. China to waive some Africa loans, offered $10 billion IMF funds. Beijing to forgive 23 interest-free loans to 17 nations. China, the largest government creditor to emerging economies, said it will forgive 23 interest-free loans to 17 African countries and redirect $10 billion of its International Monetary Fund reserves to nations on the continent. Foreign Minister Wang Yi announced the cancelizations in a meeting last week of the Forum of China-Africa Cooperation, according to a post on the ministry's website. Since 2000, Beijing has announced multiple rounds of debt forgiveness of interest-free loans to African countries, canceling at least $3.4 billion of debt through 2019, according to a study published by Johns Hopkins University School of Advanced International Studies. The canceled debt was limited to mature, interest-free foreign aid loans, which Zambia receiving the most cancelizations over that period. However, the vast majority of China's recent lending in Africa, such as concessional loans and commercial loans, have never been considered for cancellation, the report added, though some of it has been restructured. Surging inflation has triggered a wave of interest rate loan increases by central banks worldwide, including the U.S. Federal Reserve, which drives up the costs of sovereign loan repayments. Meanwhile, developing nations have amassed a $250 billion pile of distressed debt that threatens to create a historic cascade of defaults by economies that were struggling even before the COVID-19 pandemic. Beijing, which has come under criticism for its lending practices to poorer nations, accounts for almost 40% of the bilateral and private creditor debt that the world's poorest countries need to service this year. It has helped forge recent debt relief agreements, participating in the Group of 20 suspension of repayments during the pandemic. The announcement last week highlights China's efforts to build ties with developing nations, particularly through the Belt and Road Initiative. The U.S. and China are competing for influence around the world, and Beijing's announcement comes at a low point in ties between the two superpowers, with tensions rising following a visit to Taiwan by U.S. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi. What Africa wishes for is a favorable and amicable cooperation environment, not the zero-sum Cold War mentality, Wang said, according to the Post. China received the equivalent of about $38 billion through the IMF's recent injection of special drawing rights, which work like an overdraft and come with no conditions. Wang said that China is willing to channel $10 billion worth of China's SDRs through two of the fund's trusts set up to help poor and middle-income nations. Since the Forum on China-Africa Cooperation took place in Senegal in November 2021, Beijing has delivered $3 billion of $10 billion credit facilities pledged to African financial institutions, Wang said in a speech. In addition, this year, China has agreed to tariff-free entry to 98% of exports from 12 African countries and has provided emergency food assistance to Djibouti, Ethiopia, Somalia, and Eritrea. They're ganging up. They're ganging up on the U.S., chat. They're ganging up. Ganging up. It knows what these countries thrive, and it will come back to China asking for more loans and deal. Of course. China wants to build closer ties so that they get access to the resources they need to grow their economy. This is a very, very, very China sends Chinese workers to work on these projects. It interferes with local African economies like textiles. Stop riding them, Chad. It's just a better deal than the West. Well, of course it's not like China's doing this for purely altruistic reasons. But the point is that America sets up blatantly corrupt, evil, genocidal regimes. China, profiting from the deal is different from the government saying, yeah, this deal is terrible for your country, but we'll bribe you so your daughter could build a $25 million mansion in LA. That's a little bit of a different thing, right? Like, you have to use Chinese labor or you have to use Chinese companies is different from, we're going to bribe you to just genocide a population of indigenous people so we could steal the resources. You know what I mean? It's like There's a difference in scope here. Jesus Christ. I mean, there's times where China doesn't even profit from it in the end. I mean, like, listen, like, that's true of all business deals. I find it very weird. Very weird. Are you watching the stream unsubbed? You're making income inequality worse. You are doing anti-praxis. We are the only Twitch stream that will not accept scam advertisers, and I will never fuck you over by selling you crap.